Hello to all the beautiful and fiery ladies. Wishing you a joyful day overflowing with happiness and love. Always stay cheerful. Okay. Because we only live one life, oh. You fiery ladies. And next up is today's captivating story. True. 1. My neighbor's son asked me a question that changed my life. After 50, the fence between our houses had been there for 20 years. A silent agreement of privacy. A line drawn in the suburban sand. I knew my neighbors. Richard and Sarah. In the way you know people you've shared a property line with for 2 decades. We waved. We nodded. We talked about the weather. But their son, Leo. I'd seen him grow up in snapshots. A kid on a tricycle. A teenager with a skateboard. And now, a young man of nearly 30. Back home for a summer, I didn't understand. I was out there, doing my weekend ritual, trimming the hedges, pulling the odd weed when he called out. Not hello. Not nice day. He just looked at me, his hands stained with grease from the bike chain, and asked the question, the one that dismantled everything I thought I'd built. He said, Mr. Harrison, can I ask you something? I leaned on my rake, expecting a request to borrow a tool. Sure, Leo. And then it came. Before you had to do all this, he gestured vaguely at my house. My lawn. My entire life. What did you love doing? It was the had to that hit me. Not what do you do for a living? Or what are your hobbies? But what did you love? Before, I fumbled for an answer. I told him about my job in logistics. The promotions. The stability. I mentioned golf on the weekends. Safe answers. Corporate answers. But his eyes didn't waver. He just nodded slowly, as if he knew I was lying to both of us. He went back to his bike. And I went back to my weeds. But the question stayed there, hanging in the humid air between us. It wasn't an accusation. It was worse. It was an invitation. That question followed me for the rest of the week. It was a ghost in my quiet house. At my desk, staring at shipping manifests. I'd hear it. What did you love doing? In the sterile aisles of the grocery store, buying the same 5 meals I always bought. Before you had to. The life I'd built. The one that looked so successful on paper. Suddenly felt like a cage I'd meticulously constructed around myself. The divorce had been finalized 2 years ago. Susan had said I'd lost my spark. That I was just going through the motions. I'd called it stability. She called it a slow death. I thought she was being dramatic. Now, hearing a version of her words from the mouth of a near stranger, I wondered. The motions were all I had left. The house was clean. The bills were paid. The lawn was immaculate. But the man inside was a stranger. On Saturday, I didn't go out to the garden. I went into the garage. In a corner, under a stack of old tax returns and forgotten Christmas decorations, was a box. A box I hadn't opened since we moved into this house. Inside, nestled in yellowed foam, was my old Canon AE1. My father had given it to me for my 16th birthday. And for a decade. It was a part of me. I wasn't just a kid who took pictures. I was a photographer. I saw the world in frames. In light and shadow. I spent hours in dark rooms. The smell of chemicals like a kind of perfume. I loved the magic of watching an image appear on a blank sheet of paper. Where did that person go? He got a sensible degree. Then a sensible job. Then a sensible mortgage. He packed his passion away in a sensible box and promised he'd get back to it one day. Holding it felt foreign. And yet deeply familiar. The weight of it in my hands. The cool metal. I spent an hour just cleaning it, wiping away 20 years of dust. I found a battery online. Ordered it for next day delivery. I even found a local shop that still developed film. The whole process felt absurd. A 52-year-old man playing with his old toys. What was I even going to take pictures of? My perfect lawn? My empty living room? When the battery arrived, I loaded a roll of black and white film. The mechanical whir of the advance lever was a sound I hadn't realized I'd missed so much. I lifted the camera to my eye. And for the first time in years, I wasn't just looking at things. I was seeing them. The way the light hit the side of a coffee mug. The texture of the wood grain on the table. I pressed the shutter. Click. That one click started an avalanche. I took the camera with me everywhere. On my lunch break at work. Instead of eating at my desk, I walked through the industrial park behind the office. I took a picture of rust patterns on a dumpster. I took a picture of peeling paint on a forgotten door. People must have thought I was crazy. This guy in a suit, pointing an ancient camera at garbage. But I felt more alive than I had in years. The world, which had become a blurry, gray backdrop to my routine, was snapping back into focus. It was full of lines, shapes, shadows, and stories. I was finding beauty in the overlooked, the discarded. Maybe because that's how I felt. Overlooked. Discarded by my own life. A week later, I saw Leo in his yard again. This time, I walked over to the fence. He looked up, wiping his brow. "You asked me what I love to do," I said, feeling my voice crack a little. I held up the camera. I used to love this." He didn't say that's great or good for you. He just looked at the camera, then back at me. "Why'd you stop?" he asked. It was another simple question, but just as devastating as the first. I gave him the usual excuses. Life. Work. Responsibility. Money. The litany of sensible reasons we give for abandoning our joy. He listened patiently. Then he said, "My dad talks about the boat he was going to build. Has for 20 years. I think maybe the having to is just a story we tell ourselves when we get scared. A story we tell ourselves when we get scared." That line hit me harder than the first question. Was that it? Was my entire adult life, my career, my so-called stability, just a fortress I'd built to hide from the fear of failure? The fear of not being good enough? It's easy to be a promising young photographer. There's no risk. But to be a 30, Sisher, 50-year-old photographer, that requires courage. It requires facing the possibility that you might not be a genius, that you might just be average. And I'd chosen to be a successful logistics manager instead of a potentially average artist. I chose the safety of the box over the freedom of the canvas. Leo, in his youthful wisdom, had seen right through it. He hadn't just asked about a hobby. He'd asked about my fear. I got that first roll of film developed. Walking into the shop, I felt like a teenager on a first date. My palms were sweating. What if they were all terrible? What if this was all a pointless, nostalgic exercise? The kid behind the counter, who couldn't have been more than 19, handed me the envelope of prints. I took them to my car and, with trembling hands, I opened it. I pulled out the first one. It was the photo of the crack in the pavement. And it was good. It wasn't just a picture of a crack. It was about resilience. About life pushing through concrete. The others were the same. The rust. The peeling paint. They weren't just pictures of decay, they were pictures of time. Of history. I hadn't just taken photos. I had told stories. That night, I did something even scarier. I scanned my favorite print the gate hinge and I uploaded it to an online photography forum. I created an anonymous username, Urban Explorer 52. I didn't write a long description. I just gave it a title, Holding On. Then I slammed the laptop shut like it was on fire. The vulnerability was terrifying. Putting something I'd created out into the world for judgment. It was the opposite of everything my life had become. My job was about minimizing risk. This was about embracing it. I didn't check the post for 2 days. I was too afraid of the silence. Or worse, the criticism. When I finally worked up the nerve to look, my heart was pounding. I expected nothing. Or maybe a sarcastic comment. But there were 3 replies. The first said, "Nice shot." The second said, "Great use of light." And the third one stopped my breath. A user named Monochrome Mind had written, "This is incredible. The texture. The story. It reminds me of the Japanese art of kintsugi, finding beauty in imperfection. Thank you for sharing." Beauty in imperfection. That's what I'd been missing. My life had been a relentless pursuit of perfection. The perfect house. The perfect job. The perfect marriage. And it had all cracked. I thought it was ruined. But this stranger on the internet, this Monochrome Mind, had given me a new lens to see it through. My life wasn't broken. It just had a story. That one comment lit a fire. I wasn't just taking random pictures anymore. I had a purpose. I decided to start a project. A photo series I called The Beauty of the Overlooked. I started getting up at dawn to capture the morning light. I explored alleys and industrial parks I'd driven past for years without a second glance. I started seeing my town, my world, not as the boring suburb I'd grown to resent, but as a place filled with hidden art. And then I did the bravest thing of all. I started photographing people. Not posed portraits, but real moments. A tired mother waiting for a bus. A mechanic's grease-stained hands. I was terrified to ask for permission. But most people, when I explained what I was doing, were happy to share a piece of their story. This new way of seeing started to bleed into the rest of my life. At work, I was no longer just going through the motions. A logistics problem wasn't just a spreadsheet anymore, it was a puzzle. A composition of moving parts. I started finding creative solutions I never would have seen before. My boss, who had probably written me off as a reliable but uninspired drone, started to notice. He put me on a new project. One that required out-of-the-box thinking. For the first time in a decade, I felt challenged. I felt valuable. It turned out that the part of my brain that could see a story in a rusty hinge was the same part that could see an elegant solution in a tangled supply chain. One afternoon, Richard, my actual neighbor, knocked on my door. He'd seen me out at all hours with my camera and was curious. For the first time, our conversation went beyond the weather. I invited him in. I showed him some of the prints I'd made. His eyes widened. He saw our neighborhood, our shared world, through my eyes. He pointed to a photo of one of his chipped ceramic gnomes, half hidden by a rose bush. In my photo, it looked less like a tacky lawn ornament and more like a forgotten idol in a lost temple. He laughed. A deep, genuine laugh. "I was going to throw that thing out," he said. "But you made it look important." That evening, he invited me over for a barbecue. I talked with him and Sarah for hours. 20 years we'd been neighbors. And I was only just meeting them. Before Leo left at the end of the summer, we had one more conversation. We were sitting on my porch. The fence between our yards no longer feeling like a wall. I didn't have to tell him how much his question had changed me. He could see it. I wasn't the same tired, gray man he'd met a few months ago. I showed him a photo I'd taken that first day. From my side of the fence. A candid shot of him, completely absorbed in fixing his bike. This is my favorite, I told him, because it's a picture of someone doing what they love. He looked at the photo, then at me. So, what are you gonna do now? He asked. And for the first time, I had an answer. I don't know, I said. And it was the most honest and exciting thing I'd said in years. I'm not going to quit my job and become a starving artist. But I'm not going to put the camera back in the box either. I enrolled in a night class for digital photography and darkroom techniques. I started a small website, a simple online gallery for my overlooked series. The local coffee shop agreed to hang a few of my prints on their walls. They might never sell. It doesn't matter. The point isn't to be a professional photographer. The point is to be a person who sees. The point is to be alive. I gave Leo the print of him and his bike. As a thank you, you know, he said, looking at it. I just asked because you looked sad. It was that simple. He wasn't trying to be a guru. He wasn't trying to deliver some profound life lesson. He was just a young man who saw an older man who looked lost. And he reached out with a simple, a human question. He saw me. At a time when I had become invisible. Even to myself. And by seeing me, he taught me how to see again. We shook hands. And he left to go back to his own life. His own future. His own things to love. My life isn't perfect now. I still have lonely nights. I still have frustrating days at work. The divorce still aches sometimes. A single question from a neighbor's son didn't magically solve everything. But it opened a door that I had sealed shut. It reminded me that the person I was at 16 wasn't gone. He was just waiting. He was waiting for permission to come out and play again. The biggest change is this. I no longer feel like I'm waiting for my life to end. I feel like I'm participating in it. I'm paying attention. And when you pay attention, the world gives you the most extraordinary gifts, hidden in the most ordinary places. I look at that fence between our houses now, and I don't see a barrier. I see a connection, a reminder that sometimes the most profound, life-altering moments don't come from grand adventures or dramatic events. They come from a quiet conversation on a summer afternoon. They come from a simple question, asked with genuine curiosity. They come from the person you least expect, at the time you need it most. It took turning 50 to learn that the most important questions aren't, what have you achieved? Or, what do you own? The most important question is the one Leo asked me. The one I'm now asking myself every single day. What did you love doing before you had to do what you had to do? I can't answer that for you. But I can tell you this, the answer is worth finding. It might be in a dusty box in your garage. It might be in a song you stopped singing. Or a story you stopped writing. It's there. And you don't need to quit your life to find it. You just need to be brave enough to ask the question. And even braver to listen to the answer. My life didn't start over at 52. But it did start again. And for that, I will always be grateful to the kid next door. So what about you? Has a single conversation ever changed the direction of your life? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story.